This is the last chapter of our course, and actually we weren't planning to include this chapter into this course as we have enough material to describe how a creature can interact with open water and how we can render and establish good simulation and look the fastest way possible. But we thought that this scenario is extremely important, especially when we have something coming up slowly from under the water, causing this kind of water sliding, especially when the white water is behaving in a very specific way. And I saw a lot of trials or tutorials or even scenes in films which has this problem. The sliding is not as smooth as it should be. Even when using huge amount of particles, you still have some problems when detecting the relationship between the water and the creature or the surface coming up from under the water. So the solution actually, it depends totally on some few attributes and the general setup of the scene. So we have here a whale coming out from under the water, and we have the sliding foams and the water behaving really as expected with layers. And actually the rendering time and the simulation time for this scene was really good and affordable. It's like around 1 minute or something for each, especially that, as I mentioned before, in this project we had to create huge amount of shots in a very short time, and we needed to really optimize each scene the best way possible, and that's why we will work on that in this section or this chapter. Now, as you can see, we have a reaction, and the reaction extend actually in this scene to almost 1000 frame after this. So we have almost here 500 frames. We almost have additional 1000 frames to the end. But now just to concentrate on this shot. Now, things to take in consideration to justify something here. The animation for the whale, it's gonna rise, then it will be hit by spear here. That's why it's moving suddenly in a certain, like here. But else everything is smooth. We only have this object in the scene. Now, as the previous scenes, all you need to do is to open the scene and to select this whale and to go here. There is a point cache. You can load the point cache from the scenes which is mentioned here for this chapter. That's it. Open and you will have everything animated. Even the teeth and the eyes are connected with this whale using some kind of attachment concentrate. So you need nothing. You don't need to do anything else. Now for this, I just built this container, and it's just very simple container which contains the movement. As you can see, the whale is always included inside this. There's no need to create bigger one because we don't have really large ripple. Most of the white water gonna be disappear locally. It will not extend. There is no swimming, so that would be very good setup for us here. I don't prefer to rotate or move the container to just shortcut or reduce the size like other scenarios. Sometimes it's better and less problematic to just keep it fixed and do the work as we are doing here. The second thing is that the size of the scene. The units here are meters for display units and centimeters here, and you can do centimeter by centimeter is the same. Now what gonna tell us the right side is the dimensions. This whale is almost 11 to 12 meters, so if we will go here to the container and see the size, we will see that it is actually 12 by 12 almost for the width and the length. The height is small because we don't expect the particles to jump a lot because it's just rising slowly from under the water. If needed, we can increase this height, but this is the basic setup and it's easy as this, and it's in meters as you can see. For the scene scale, I prefer always to keep it 1, except if we needed to change that. And in this case, as I mentioned here, it's 5 units. I increase this to 5 units, means that I'm multiplying everything here by 5. This number can be also, I can just change it to 1 and put the scene scale here, and the result will be that this is a huge whale, which I think can be even good for what we are doing here. But in general, this is the idea. The idea, you can change the scale here, or the actual scale of the whale, which I don't prefer, and you can change it here, of course. This is the easiest way for me, and just I put here 5, like the other scenes. This is exactly the main solution to make sure that you can have the right kind of behavior for the water and the whale interacting with the white and water body. Now, I'm not reducing the cell size now, just I will say, okay, voxels to millions or cells, and we will increase this number later, because this effect, having the whole water and foam sliding from the surface, will not show really in details, except if you have a huge amount of foam, and we will see how much we have in this scene to get this result. Now, going down, I always prefer to keep the steps per frame 1, unless if we have something which requires us to increase this number. As example, when the whale is rising a little fast, so we may need to increase this number into 2 maximum for the scene, and if needed you can just increase it more, but the most realistic results comes when the steps per frame are 1. Time scale is the same, everything else I will keep the same. I will not activate wetting because the whale will be in the water. There's no need for, there's no time to see the dryness or anything, but you can activate it, of course, if you need. Also here, for the default viscosity, I will leave it 0, just to understand something. There is some kind of problem in a lot of simulators, which is the friction or the sliding relationship between objects and the water body. The solution usually comes when you increase the viscosity. And here in phonics, if you increase the viscosity, you start seeing the stickness or the sliding behavior better. But I will not depend on that at all here, because the general rule is that the water has really, in this case, 0 viscosity, but you can always just put a small number here and have some more stickness. So I will leave it as it is, no surface tension as usual, nothing else. And for the water body, I leave it open all the way, even down, because there is no impact. Let's continue down. Now we have the foam, and the main trick here for this solution or scenario is to have enough water particles. This is the first thing, because you will not notice these small details coming from the surface down if you don't have enough particles. This is the first one. The second one is to create huge amount of foam, and you can do that only here, because there are 2 ways to create foam in phonics or in general. One of them is to create the foam by itself, which can be triggered or activated by having the water particles moving in a certain speed or have certain, let's say, vorticity. And when the whale touch the water, it causes this kind of energy or movement for the water particles, which gonna cause or enable the foam to be generated. So I will leave it 0 now, and we'll see what is the trick. This is the main idea here. We need this kind of foam. The other kind of foam is created from the splash. So we can enable that by enabling foam on hit, and in that scenario we will have some foam coming from the water, and actually it's coming from the splash created by the splash. Especially when the splash is touching the water, it will be converted into foam. But then we will not have the foam in early stages, especially that when you activate this one, it will be created actually under the water. Remember, we have some parameters who can really describe how the foam is created, and we will go through them here. But again, if you see here, the depth of the water gonna affect the generation. Also for the foam, it's the same as bubbles in phonics, means when the movement gonna start from under the water, we should see the foam under the water at the before even the whale comes out, which gonna give us an idea about the behavior. So before it comes out, there will be a huge amount of foam under the water on the surface of the whale, and when it starts coming out, we will start noticing some of these sliding down, and they will increase because the drops of water speed gonna increase, which gonna enable the trigger here and to create more foam. This is the whole trick. So we can just enable the splash, and we'll have little amount of foam here, and we have to enable the foam, but I will leave it 0, so you'll see how much foam we will have just by activating the splash. Other parameters I will leave as they are. I will not change anything. The only thing is the output scene. I will just put everything in a folder, cache here. I will name it water, and I can start my first simulation just to make sure that we can see or expect some results. So I will simulate things, and I will come back as soon as I have some frames. So that's enough. I will stop the simulation here. It didn't really take much time. One thing I forgot to do is to fill the container, which if we go here, it's as easy as just initiating the fill up, and I put 16 just to match the level of the sea we have the plane, and that's it. So we have this behavior, and I can slide the time and see it looks nice. The whole idea here why it looks nice, because of the scene scale. So now we have something decent, and as you can see, you can just detect the other particles by going to preview. And of course, just to mention here, the interaction is the whale body and its teeth. So preview, and if we will go to foam, we have the foam here. I will show the foam, and as you can see, we have really almost nothing. This is the foam. It's activated here but not activated alone, so it's activated here, and I can increase this number to see if that will create more foam, but it will not be enough for sure. Now from here we have almost 300,000 of the water body particles, which is good for the test. Now I prefer always to work with more particles even in the test period. And also we have some splash which are much more than the foam itself. Even when we go with the time slider here, we have just a little amount of foam, less splash of course, because there is no need for splash because the whale is already above the water, and it's just 1000 or something, which is nothing, so we have to increase it. But the main idea in this stage is to see that the water had been pushed up by the whale, and it's sliding, as you can see here. I can just increase or just have this full screen. So it's sliding, and dripping down, which is exactly what I need. So all we need to do is to create enough particles, and they are sliding the right way without even the need to create any kind of friction. And the third thing here is to make sure that we don't have a lot of pushing, because we need it to slide. I think the behavior is nice, but I don't want it to jump here, especially when the whale is rising up. So I can go select the whale, and from phonics properties I can bring this down to 0.5 or any number now, and you can change it if that will change the behavior. I don't need really the whale to affect the water, but to push the water. That's it. And we need to create foam, so every drop of water gonna cause the foam to follow and slide with it. So let's just change few settings and redo the simulation. So instead of increasing this, actually I will just decrease it. I will make sure just I have foam created from splash. The splash particles are the yellow one, and they seem nice, and they be created in the right spots, so no problems. I will leave it as it is. Really, you don't have to change something if you don't have to change something. So on this one I will increase the value. Let's put 2 as example, and for the threshold I will leave it as it is. And let's redo the simulation and see the results. I will come back after we have some frames. So I will stop here, and as you can see the simulation time is so fast. So I will stop here and I will go to check the amount of particles, and let's go to the beginning. As you can see here, we have almost none foam particles. So we will knew now that most of the particles are coming from splash, and here's almost none because we reduced the amount of particles coming from splash here to 0.01. So what I will do, I need to reduce this. So let's bring it down to 2 point, let's say 5, 3 something, and let's try with this setting. But before that, yeah, let's try with this setting and come back to know that we have something decent, then we can build on top of that. The amount I can increase to 3, and let's do it again, and I will come back after I have some results. Again, we have really less than we expected, very small number, and for the last time I will just decrease the threshold 10 times. Let's just 0.2825, and let's start now and see. Always put your eyes here to track the number. I will redo the simulation again. As you can see, we have a huge amount of foam particles. I will stop the simulation here. No need to continue because we see the results. Let's keep our eye here and let's just see how we can control this. Just a second until it's just, we are good now. So we started like this, and as soon as the whale start pushing the water, before if even outside the water, there is no splash at all, because we are not depending on creating the white water from splash, but it's alone generated from the foam here. As you can see, we have here no splash at all. The whale still under the water, but we have a huge amount of foam particles, and I would say they are bubbles in this stage. Now we have even much more, and as you can see, it's almost more or double the amount of liquid, which is great. Now we have this, and I like the idea of the lines here because they are sliding and they forming this pattern, which is natural. And also I'm happy that we reduced the velocity or the motion factor by going to phonics properties to this number or even less, because I don't want the whale to push the particles away, but just to allow them to slide from its surface. Now if we go even further, we can see that the amount of particles are getting crazy. I just stop here. It's 5 millions or 6 millions almost, and as much as we continue, let's go a little back because I didn't simulate to this degree. Yeah, here it's almost 6 millions, which is a lot of particles. Now, two things to take in consideration. The first thing is that the relationship between the foam particles and the liquid is not 1-to-1. Means not every particle of the water body is having certain speed gonna generate the foam. It's more complicated than this. That means if I will increase the amount of liquid particles into like 10 times than this number, it doesn't mean that I will increase the foam particles 10 times. It actually gonna stay around this number, but I will have more particles here for the water body to define everything, because else I will have a really very low resolution mesh, which is not what I want. After all, I need to have this very thin layer of water on the whale body, as you can see it here in this stage. This layer is very thin, and actually I can make it much thinner than this. Even the drops of water here, we can see it, we can make it thinner, but this is nice because it's covered mainly with the foam. We can see it here. So we need to increase the water resolution or the amount of particles for the water, and that will not really affect the foam. So we don't need to reduce the foam generation when we increase the amount of water. That will accordingly increase the splash and the liquid. Now the splash can increase. It will increase dramatically with what we will have here with the water. So if you increase the water, the foam will be almost the same, but it will increase for sure, and the splash can increase, and that's exactly what we want. Now another thing, when we simulate in a higher resolution, because we have the whale rising, I noticed that some spots are getting bold. Even we should expect some coverage here, and that's because we don't have enough liquid particles, but also we can really benefit a little increasement in the steps here in the dynamic. Maybe we have to go to 2, but in this stage that's all we need to know. And I think what we need to do now is to go through the other parameters to make sure that we have everything the way we expect, known that we have the amount of particles we are expecting. The main idea or the main equation I always mention is that I tend to have amount of particles for the water body, similar amount for the foam, or between half or similar amount for the foam, and the splash half of the foam. This is like very rough equation which works in most cases. So let's just go through the whole parameters. Let's go to foam and slowly try to change the values here to make sure that we have everything right. For half-life, I will leave it as it is, no need to increase it. For max outside edge, there are no particles outside the container, so I don't care about changing this, but this seems nice for me. For the size, really we don't need to change anything here because we are not activating the B2B interaction. For this scene scale, a value of 0.012 worked fine in the other chapters. So I will leave it as it is, but it doesn't really affect the behavior of the particles, especially that we don't have any interaction between each other. So they behave somehow independent from P2P interaction. Also, it's better to test and see if that will affect the scene. However, the variation is small, there is no variation, or big. Mostly these parameters work really well when we have bubbles and in small scale simulations. That's it for here. And for the rising speed also for this scene scale, if you remember in other chapters, 125% is basically a good amount, but again we can change it if we have odd behavior, and this usually 10 times this number, so it's 1.25. So I will leave it as it is and we'll simulate. If we have some problems, we can decrease or increase these. Again, to explain this, the rising speed works underwater, which basically I don't really care about it now. And the falling speed works above the water. It affects the particles, the foam particles above the water, only above the water. And the idea here is that when we decrease this number, it will cause certain kind of a drag on the total movement of the water. So I will leave it as it is, no change here. And for the pattern, I will leave it as 1, but I want to decrease the radio to 0.3 or 0.4. Again, based on the scene scale, I want it to be 30 centimeters, so I can form some kind of pattern which may look good. And before we tested that with other whales and it worked well. So this is the number. For the splash, again, I'm not changing anything here. The amount of particles is going to increase when we increase the water body particles. And if it's not enough, we have to go and change this. But for now, that's good. No mist. For the amount of foam, I will leave it as it is. It will contribute that, so that's good to have some foam particles, but it's not playing the major role here. But when we increase the splash, increase the water body, the splash gonna be increased, which gonna cause increasement also in the foam. So when the splash particles gonna land on the water, it will cause or generate some foam particles. Here I will not change anything. Also, the liquid like is 1, and if you don't remember this thing, in other tutorials like the one we did at FX PhD, we explained this factor which can play a really huge role in reshaping the water. Basically, it will cluster the water, the particles, the white particles, means it will make them accumulate or gather more, forming some kind of more liquidy shape for the water. So I increase that to 3 as example if I want something like more watery than a splash random. If you decrease this number, they will behave like a mist or dumb particles. That's it. Other parameters here, I don't think we need to change anything. If we will go down, the only thing here we need to go through the rendering and change few parameters, but we will do that after we do the main simulation. So I will do the simulation for, let's say, 100 frames, and I will come back after I have some results. So I did few things, then I simulated, and the things I did is that first I forgot to increase the resolution, so I just pressed this button several times until I get this number, which is almost 54 millions of cells, which can increase the amount of water body dramatically after it was like almost 2 millions. And also I did something which is extremely important for me, but you can do whatever you think is right. So if you remember, the foam amount was increasing dramatically here. It reached like 6 to 7 millions while we have just a little amount of water. And what I wanted to do is, during the rise of the whale, I wanted to decrease the amount of foam, or just to control it as much as I can. So after 20 frames, I just keyframed the first value as it was. Then after 20 frames, let's just jump to the next frame. I reduced the amount of foam from 3 to 2.5, and I kept this. I can just actually keep this 0 to 8. Then also after 10 frames, when the whale is totally up here, I wanted to decrease the foam amount more, and I increased this so it will be hard for the foam to be created. What I'm doing here is to control the amount of foam, because it will be more than I want. But again, you can leave these numbers and expect to have something decent. Why I'm doing this? I'm doing this is that this concept is extremely important when using the liquid solvers. You have to animate parameters here, because what happens sometimes you will get certain behavior because you set up everything as an initial state and you expect everything to behave the right way. But you have the ability to move or to change or to animate these particles, especially when you have something like small scale water. You can control the surface tension or the viscosity during the time. That will reshape the behavior or the amount of particles generated in a certain time. This is what I'm trying to do or to prove here. That's it for the particles, and I think that was good, because if you track the numbers by going to simulation, at the beginning we have nothing, and after a few frames we start having the amount of particles here, and it is 8 millions. This is the basic number, and it shouldn't go up or down much because it's contained in very limited area. And for the foam particles, even it's not up, it's still under the water, we have some foam particles, no splash at all because the whale is still under the water. And if I will go here and increase the display amount of particles, because I reduce it to speed up the viewport, if I go to 0, I should see the water body, which is totally nice, let's say. I will go a few frames more, and let's track the amount of particles. Still the whale is under the water, if you notice. In this stage, the whale is above the water. I will increase this because I don't want to see this amount of particles and is slowing my system. So let's go up again and track the amount of particles. We have almost 500,000 or 600,000 of foam particles, and remember that I'm decreasing the amount. It's not just increasing like the basic setup we did before, but we have almost the same number of liquids. We have almost 45,000 of splash, which is good amount, and we have something nice here, and we have logical numbers here. So that's it, and now we can jump to the rendering and start just tweaking few settings to make sure that we have the right results we're expecting, like we did for other scenarios in this course. For the rendering, as we did with the previous chapters, all you need to do is to activate here the ocean mesh, because we want it to be extended infinitely. And for the level, we need to make sure that it is the same sea level or the same initial level we set up before or above. No need to do anything here. For the ocean subdivision, if you need a smooth ending here at the end at the horizon, you can increase this number. I will leave it as it is. For the horizon roughness, it's 1. Also that will smooth the water in the horizon. But if you have some artifacts here which is in the horizon, when the water is going to be rendered, if it is in front of the whale, you can decrease this to 0. That's it. And for the smoothness, we can just do 1 or 2, and I prefer to use liquid particles, so we take that in consideration. And we need to have some displacement. I prepared the usual displacement we used in the other scenes because we have the same scene scale, and let's just use it in the scene here, which is this one. And here we have just this parameter which is going to control everything else. I didn't change much here, just the level of detail 10, wave height is 1 meter of course, a vertical offset 0, sharpness, and you can of course change the velocity coherence to get different behavior. That's it, very simple. I didn't really change or do much. I will just bring this here. Now we have displaced water. For the water material, it's the regular, very simple one, which is black for the diffuse, 100%. For the reflection, I have 100%. For the refraction, same, but I just a little shifted this so we don't have full white. 0.97 also here. I like to have some diffusion during when the depth is happening. Also for the fog color, I use this color. You can change it. It will give you the sea color or the water color after all. And of course you have to introduce fog multiplier so you change the color during the depth, so it's like a volume. That's it. And for the whale we have the material, of course, and we have the eyes material. And for the environment, what I did is that I simply use HDRI here, so we can always go and choose from the materials here from V-Ray the HDRI, V-Ray HDRI, and from here you can pick up one image which is HDRI. As you can see it here, it's big enough, and I will leave it with the course. And of course we have to change it to spherical so it's surrounding the scene, and I rotate it a little because I need this section to be my background. Also for the overall multiplier, I reduce this so I have it dimmed a little, because if I will increase it, as you can notice here, it will be brighter, and I don't want that. I just want 0.5, but I have full control over this. Also, nothing else here, I didn't change anything. Make sure the color space is inverse gamma, and that's it. For the rendering setting, you can do whatever you think is right for your scene, but a very simple setup is to have some subdivisions here, more than 8 or 12 if you don't want any kind of flickering. But when you use V-Ray denoiser, if you use this and you just leave it to mild, that's it, because the default is more. So mild is just really small amount of denoising, which will not kill the details. That will help you reducing this to very controllable value. Now these are the results. If you of course want to render a sequence, all you need to do is to activate the folder, separate folder, so it will be saving the image and the passes if you have passes. Here you can just put the frame range, and of course you can save the file here. Very basic information. For me, I tend always to use multi-matte elements, but now with CryptoMate, that was amazing. That will give you all the elements here. Also you can use Z depth. You can use atmospheric to separate the foam particles from the water, and that's it. You can use whatever here. That's the basic parameters. For the lighting, we use the lighting in other chapters, and it's the same setup, the same everything. It doesn't really need to be above the scene, but we can just bring it here. I made it as a group because I want to move it together, but it's a sunlight, and the sunlight has really simple parameters. I didn't change much here. The blend angle is this. That's it. Nothing really changed. I use the filter, and here's the ambient light to light the other areas which is not lit by the main light, because I didn't use, if you go here to render setting, in this setup I'm not using GI at all. Neither I'm depending on the environment here to let any light. All the environment is coming from the max environment from here. That will speed up everything. Also I add always this light, which is just omni light, and with a small tint which I can increase or decrease to add a little ambient but with some volume. So basically it's a diffuse. Coming back to this view, let's see the shaders. So the shaders, easy to create, we did that in previous chapters, but this one is for the foam. And for the foam, what I will do is I will just simply render with the current settings, and I will change according to what I will see. So I will stop here and I will render just one frame. Let's see what we're gonna get. So this is the result. It didn't really take time, but let's just analyze it. I'm changing the exposure a little to have something different, and also I can just play with the hue saturation, so I have something more saturated here in the green. And you can do whatever you think is right, but just, you know, you have this control here. Of course you can do all this in the 2D program, but just mentioning that I have some setup. Now let's analyze everything. I think the foam, or here the splash and the foam are bright. So what we can do is that we can reduce the diffuse factor of both. So I will do this, and I will do this also for the foam, for the splash. I got a message during the render which says you have to, it's better to identify or determine which is the simulator for the foam to be taken in consideration, especially that we have a displacement and that we can tint the foam under the water. So I have to do that here, and this is what I did, is just press this and you choose this simulator here in the foam. Also you can increase this 0.3 or something, so you have some colors for the white water under the sea level. Everything else is the same. I think I need to reduce the radius for the foam particles, but I will leave it as it is now. Nothing is changed here. Also for the renderer, for the motion blur, I can just force it to do that, or just from the renderer, that will take the parameters from the renderer. Going down, the point here is the most important thing, and in here we can describe the volume, or how big the points or the rendered points of the foam. So I will go to 0.9, nothing else here to change. And for the splash, I notice that they are big here in the edge. These are mostly splash because we don't see the foam yet. The foam comes after this stage here. So we can just reduce the value to 0.5, and let's look at it again. Of course we can render other frames, but from this I see that we have a good amount of particles, but I prefer if I have more, especially here. So I will just multiply both the foam particles and the splash by 2, and we can do that with count multiplier. We have a decent amount. Let's jump to another frame as example here, and I will render this frame and I will come back after the render is finished. The render is done. It took maybe 1 minute and something, that's it, but this is not full HD, but again, just a few tricks and you'll speed up the rendering, and for me it's nice. Now I see here that we have to increase the subdivision to enhance the horizon, but everything is blending well, especially that we have the horizon right one, and we have the look we are seeking. Let's look at the video again. I think we can do a few changes. One of them is to increase the foam particles. Let me just loop this so we have it all the way looping. We can increase the amount of white particles, but we keep the keyframes, so we just increase the basic one, which is, if I go here, foam, so I can increase this at the beginning to 5 or 6 or maybe even more, and keep it like that. So in the second frame, which is here at 20, Instead of having 2.8 or something, we can just keep it like 5 or 6, but we decrease it on time. So we have initial amount bigger than the amount we have, is to have smoother result. I would say always it's good to increase the amount of sea particles, although they seem really nice. The splash we can increase it a little also, but in general we have the result we are seeking. The collision is perfect, and to get this collision I had to increase the sub-stepping into 2, which if you go here, this into 2. So that's the final result of our project. I hope this gives you an idea about the sliding particles. We didn't use any kind of viscosity or sliding or stickness. We just did the default settings, and as long as our scene have the right scale, the right stepping, and our objects are not moving really fast, this setting will work really well. And the amount of the pattern of the sliding white particles is so good, it looks really realistic. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching.